You know, if you make the denominator small enough, the quotient can be very high. Thank you, Guru. I'm delighted to be here, and you know, Martin Casado yesterday morning remarked on the community we have around this movement and how diverse it is. And I've been very impressed with the people I've spoken to personally and that have shown demos and have spoken at this conference with how truly diverse it is, horizontally and vertically, the roles that you play and the industries that you are part of. That makes me really more optimistic than anything else that this is something that's actually taking hold. And I mean, I have a lot of scientific interest in it, of course, as a computer scientist, but I have a greater interest in seeing it have some commercial impact. In the startup work I've done, it's mostly translating university or institutional research into startup companies. And it's a real challenge to make that transition and to take something that might be cool technically and find that people actually want to pay for it. I spent quite an enjoyable period at the Plug and Play Tech Center in Sunnyvale. It's a terrific startup incubator. It's not your typical incubator. The business model is not based on their going public or getting bought. It's based on rent, so it's very sustainable. But I give a presentation sometimes. We have a thing called Plug and Play University, and I give a presentation entitled, So What? And it's all about, so you have this idea, and that's great, and it's cool, and it works, but who cares? You know, if it's not going to be something people care about enough to deploy and implement, then I don't care how cool it is technically. So what excites me about this is that enough people seem to care that it means something to them. And it was really the prospect of that sort of impact that brought me back into networking from my sort of sabbatical doing startups, and I was an engineering dean and had a lot of aspects of engineering to get excited about. But this was worthwhile. So I am with the Open Networking Foundation, and this presentation is to tell you something about the Open Networking Foundation, why we exist and what we do. And I love playing with words. It's something I grew up with. And so I just came up with this the other day. We are the standard bearer for SDN. And that is the standard, or the flag that we carry around. And we also do some standards, but I will put that in perspective for you. So these are the things I will cover, but this is not an outline because this is not the order in which I'm going to cover things, but I want you to understand why this was created, what's different about it from any other organization, and possibly motivate you to figure out how you might contribute to it, because we are a contributor-led organization from various sorts of players. So basically what we are is a foundation for the advancement of software-defined networking. And oh, by the way, we do create some standards. We are not what I would consider a traditional SDO, Standards Development Organization. There are plenty of those. Our mission is a little bit different from theirs. Our vision is not to create standards. Our vision is to make SDN what I call the new norm for networks. I love alliteration. I want to look back 5 years from now and have everybody around me saying, can you believe we actually used to do it that way? I mean, right now if you look at a switch, what does it cost to put an OpenFlow client in the switch? Well, somebody told me not too long ago that the cost of putting an OpenFlow client into a switch or putting OpenFlow into a switch is really fairly small. But the cost of not putting it in can be gigantic. I want this to be, well, of course we do it this way. And haven't we always done it this way? So our mission, if I wanted to anywhere define the success of ONF, how do I just tell whether I'm successful in my job, whether we're successful as an organization, is to see a vibrant market in products, services, customers, applications, and users. If that happens, I will feel we have done our job. So we have some tangible and concrete goals. We're creating standards to help this along. We want to create them rapidly and in a different way. That's why we were created for the switching-based ecosystem. But we also want to accelerate the understanding of how to realize the abstractions behind the concept of OpenFlow, and that we've heard a lot about in the last 2 days. I don't know when the last time was that I spent 2 days at a conference and heard the word abstraction more times than I have in the last 2 days. It's probably been 20 years since I heard it mentioned that much. Just from a legal standpoint, we are a nonprofit industry consortium. We're known as a 501c6. You've probably heard of 501c3. C3s are charitable organizations. I regret to say that we are not one of those. You know how many 501cs there are? There are 28. So we're number 6. We are funded by member dues, and that's our only source of revenue at this point. Membership is open to any organization that wants to pay $30,000 a year, agrees to the bylaws and the IPR policy. On the matter of dues, the dues fund our operation. But they're fairly high as these things go. And there's sort of some logic to that, which is that as an organization to, first of all, get some standards out and make things happen, we are looking for only the seriously committed participants. And so this is a fairly high entry level. A lot of people would love to come and go to the discussions and talk and travel. We don't have a lot of travel. But we really want people with skin in the game, and it costs a fair amount of money. But you'll see that it actually can be money well spent because our IPR policy is terrific. It's royalty-free for everything having to do with OpenFlow. So we have, if you want to use protocol, any IP in the protocol, the trademark, you want to trade on it, sell something that's branded OpenFlow, we own all that stuff. You get that. It's not like reasonable and non-discriminatory, but one person's definition of reasonable might not be the same as another person's definition of reasonable. I've had those arguments in the IEEE. There's no argument here. It's free. It's included. $30,000. Compare that to the cost of hiring a law firm for a week and a half. It's easier this way. Now, ONF itself owns no intellectual property. It's all in the hands of our members, and so it's not us that would get sued. We're here to protect the interests of our members. And we are the Open Networking Foundation. The hyphen is actually between the open and the networking, not between the networking and foundation. We're advocates of open networking. Our deliberations are pretty much closed to non-members for reasons of protection of their IP. Now, we declare that we are about open interfaces and not open source. And we don't do reference implementations, but we really encourage them by the community for anybody that wants to do that. It's just not part of our charter to do. And frankly, we wouldn't be very good at that because we are me. I'm the only employee, and I'm busy. So when you create a new organization, you have an opportunity to create a culture of employees, members, and the community. And we are trying to innovate not only in technology and an approach to networking, we're trying to innovate in how you run an organization like this and in how you create standards. You saw I've been to a few standards meetings myself. I learned a lot. There's a lot that I admire and I take with me, and there are a few things that I really don't want to ever repeat again in my life. This gives us a chance to do things in a better way. As much as possible, I'd like not to have too many politics getting in the way because we do want to run quickly, and we want to really be an agile organization. I want to be a learning organization. I consider ONF to be a startup company. We're good at that in Silicon Valley, which means we try stuff, we iterate with customers. You've probably seen Steve Blank's presentation about that. A startup company is an organization in search of a business model. So our members are our customers. We're learning what serves their needs best. We're not afraid to try things, and if they don't work, we'll fix them. We are not putting processes in place of need, so we sort of lag the need, and I get complaints from members, we don't have a process for this, and we don't have a process for that, and it's true, but now we know what they should be, we'll put some in place. As for driving standards, we are unusual in that we are a user-led organization. And I'll show that on the organization sort of description in a moment. But we are trying to create standards that actually meet user needs. I've been in a lot of standards committees where it was a battleground between vendors, and the users did not really have a voice. And sometimes I would try to bring in the user's voice, and no one would believe me because I was with a vendor, and they were probably wise not to. We all think we speak for our users. I'd rather have the users speaking for themselves. Partly because of the cost of entry, but partly in the way we interact with our members, we are looking for the contributors among our member companies to be those that do understand the implementation impacts of what they propose and what we standardize. You know, I love the beauty of network architecture. When I got married, I married a musician, and so she makes beautiful music, and I still have a cassette tape of our wedding, which we try to listen to on our anniversary every year. And our rabbi was a very good friend, and he was talking about beauty a lot in this and how we're both attracted to beauty, but he did not understand what beauty I saw in computer architecture. And I felt sorry for him because there is great beauty in these things and in network architecture. But we're not a slave to it, and I in particular am not a slave to it. And that's why the reality of implementation really has to guide what we do and what we don't do. Now, the third bullet there is my favorite one, what differentiates us from a lot of others. We're going to standardize as little as necessary. Now, that means we have sort of, a minimalist approach to what we standardize. What does that leave the vendors to do? Well, there will be vendor differentiation, and we're talking a lot about vendor extensions, but we don't want that to lead it to lock-in, nor do we want to fragment the market. We want to create a market. So we're trying to balance these things in really the most effective way. Another aspect of standardizing as little as possible is what Scott said, and Jennifer reiterated yesterday. We are becoming more and more like a software community. And a lot of software standards do not emerge from standards committees before the fact. Either they emerge from the industry and stand alone, or they then go and become de jure standards after they are de facto standards. And that's something we look at very closely. And for parts of this whole scene that are very much software dependent, that's probably where we'll let the industry experiment and see what comes out. We don't put people's names on drafts. I had people working for me in some of my previous positions who told me that their career objective is to have their name on an RFC. Well, that's very nice, and that'll help your job mobility, but it won't help you do well inside our company. So that's a cultural behavior that we are discouraging by not having that association. Now, because this is a nascent movement, and we are still trying to understand what it can do, I'm trying to get implementations out there very quickly. So they have to be relevant, they have to be implementable, and this is where the balance between gorgeous architecture and the reality of implementation comes into play. Now, when I say protocol agnostic, in the ideal world, and in the world of the network processing companies, even today you can see them outside in the demos, I shouldn't care what these fields in a header actually mean. Is this a MAC source address? Is it a VLAN header? Is it an MPLS tag? Is it an IP something? I don't know. It's at a byte offset, a certain number of bits. If it matches a pattern, I take this action. I wish it were that way. Back in my mind, the research motivation for experimenting with non-IP protocols says that we shouldn't be a slave to the IP and MAC fields and headers. Well, we can't get there today because we need merchant silicon to create a mass market and to be easily adoptable by many, many people. And so here's another balance we have to strike. I want to accommodate what can be done. I want to move them in that direction, and that's a tension that we manage. And by doing this, quickly and making it possible to do some experimentation, we'll get some feedback on what the customers and the users really do need. So we're governed by a board of directors. I'll show you who they are in a moment. There are no vendors on the board. This is a bit unusual, but it's by design. Frankly, if I were a vendor, I would be delighted to go somewhere where the users are telling me, if you build this, we will buy it. Rather than my saying, I'm going to build this and you'd better buy it, and having to say, gee, I'm not sure that's what I wanted. We have an executive director reports to the board. Right now it's our only employee, and it's perhaps the only person in the whole organization that has to be vendor neutral. I can't own stock in any of the companies. I thought, gee, I should, what if I put $1,000 into each of the members? And I can't do it. I'm sorry, so I don't have any equity. And I actually have an interest in seeing all of our members succeed, both the users and the vendors. And the feeling I've gotten from this movement is that we're all creating a really big pie. We'll all have a share in the pie. Let's make it a great tasting pie. We have a technical advisory group that reports to the board. It advises the board on things that are kind of fundamental that cross over different technical areas. This is the Guru Committee. And it's made up of people from users and from vendors, members only. But these are the wise people of ONF. They don't make decisions. They don't tell any working group what to do. They will advise, report to the board. So we have working groups. This is nothing novel. But what's a little different about our working groups is that they can only be created if the board says so. You have to make a case to the board what you're going to do and when. And they are only chaired by people appointed by the board. They don't elect their own chair. And that simplifies things a lot. Now, how do we select them? It's really based on the initiative that they show and the suitability they have for the task. It's work. And you have to be willing to do the work to get into a position of responsibility. And we do charge the chairs with a lot of responsibility. They're the ones who have to determine whether their group is ready to progress something, it's met the sufficient level of consensus, and they have to make sure it sells to the board. So we give them a lot of responsibility and a lot of autonomy in running their working groups. The board has chartered some working groups. I'll tell you what they are. They're really chartered for a fairly short term. Then they have to reapply, say, here's what we did. We said we were going to do it. We did this. Now, either we're done or we would like to go on and do the following. They're meeting really on their own timetable. We don't have regular meetings. Our second member workday is tomorrow. We had one in June. We've only been around since March, publicly launched March 22nd, so we're 6 months old on Saturday. And we don't have regular meetings. We might have regular meetings, but we really want them to run at their own speed. We want not to disadvantage people in other locations and geographies. They have mailing lists, they have conference calls. Turns out that does disadvantage people from other languages, cultures, and time zones. So we'll have to balance that. But we're deliberately not trying to make this an organization that people want to join so they can go on lovely so-called working vacations in exotic, beautiful locations. The chairs are de facto members of the Council of Chairs, and we meet weekly on conference calls. To assure consistency across the working group, figure out who does what, share best practices, and then decide something is ready to go to the board for approval. The executive director is the chair of the Council of Chairs. So we look kind of like this at present, and it's a pretty boring picture, but this is how it works. These are the companies that are on the board. There are 6 companies, so-called promoters. They pay a little more. And then we have the founding directors, Nick McEwen and Scott Schenker, who are also on the board. And we have some of these people here in the room today, and I'm really thrilled by that. They've been a terrifically supportive board coming from data center network operators with experience and real motivation of why they're doing this. So they've been very helpful to me personally, and I think terrific guidance for the organization. And as of today, these are the other members. So we are a total of 47 member companies. A lot of the people are here, of course. Give me a minute to look at that. There are other users, not just vendors here. I would certainly point out Comcast, NTT, and Tencent among them. So we have software, we have hardware, we have chips, we have some training, we have a little bit of sort of applied research. It's a terrific group of companies. Now, this list is perhaps more notable not by the names that are there than by the names that are not there. And I don't really want to name any of them, and they all seem to come from one particular letter of the alphabet, but I will mention one that is not here, and that is Apple. And I think it's probably a good idea because the last thing that I want to see is for SDN to become ISDN. OpenFlow started at Stanford, and there was this ad hoc group that met on Tuesday afternoons every week, and they hammered out release 0.8 and 0.8.9 and 0.9 and 1.0 and 1.1 before we took it over. And so most of the implementations you'll see are of 1.0. There are some of 1.1. And if you were at Interop, that was almost all, I think all 1.0 implementations, partly coming from the reference implementation of Open vSwitch. And so this does all of the normal things of transferring flow tables from a controller to a switch. And it's got field definitions for what you do with the MAC fields and IPv4, and there's sort of a single table. And it was very basic and very useful. And then it led to 1.1, which added somewhat more complexity, a special sequence of tables, and a lot of counters for measuring when things happen. Hasn't been as widely implemented because it's harder for the merchant silicon vendors to handle some of these tables. And so what we're doing now is you continue to evolve this in ways that I think are going to be helpful to the market. We have defined these, and we've chosen to continue calling them 1.x rather than 2.0, because we're not ready for a wholesale change. We want to get more field experience with this. So we're going to put in important missing pieces like IPv6, and this will be coming out December 8th. We have a board meeting, expect the board to approve what's in 1.2. We'll have some configuration things in there and a lot of extensibility. We don't really have modularity of the spec yet, which we will need to kind of make this a more sensible family. Hopefully that'll come along early next year, and you can see some of the things here. And we are certainly interested in what it means to be conformant, as well as interoperable with OpenFlow. Now, as I've said before, I want to see experience by customers and users. And so we're seeking widespread adoption of 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 to get this sort of feedback. So I'm talking to our board members, I'm talking to our other members, saying, what are your plans for implementing and deploying this? What might be standing in the way? What should we be doing differently to help that along? We certainly want to take advantage of what the current merchant silicon can do, because it can give us tremendous amounts of experience, even if it's not the ideal yet. But I also want to motivate the merchant silicon vendors to see that mountaintop. That's where we're going. Let's figure out a way to get there. We might have to tack left or tack right, but that's where we're going to end up. We have chartered 3 working groups so far. They are these. Essentially, everything was done in the Tuesday afternoon meetings, and so it was kind of a mishmash, and that turned into the extensibility working group, which kind of has everything. That'll change a little bit over time. So they put an extensible match, extensible error messages. You know, we have a wire protocol. They've been in charge of the forwarding model, and also all the MAC specifics and the IPv4 specifics, and the IPv6 sort of de facto because it came in with our extensible match. And they are working very hard, and there are a lot of people on that, and it's terrifically led by Jean Tourille, who was here yesterday. I'm not sure if he's here today. Absolutely terrific contributor. Configuration management. Configuration and management is what it really is, and Deepak Bansal, I know he's been here this week, and they're doing configuration protocol and also a schema for some basic configuration functions under guidance from the board and the tag for the next release, and then continuing to flesh that out in future releases. We've had discussions about multiple controllers. Right now it's just a single controller with a single known backup. We'll work on that a little bit more. And then testing and interoperability under Michael Howe from Ixia, who's also here. They're off to a really good start looking at conformance, performance, and interoperability. This question came up yesterday. What does it mean to be conformant with OpenFlow? Well, we want to figure that out because we know our members want to say that they are, and the users want to know that what they're buying certainly is. I also understand that there's a difference between conformance to a standard and interoperability with others that conform, and so we are tackling those with that understanding. We have some other discussion groups with a mailing list that are not chartered working groups, but they're topics that our members wanted to work on. So we have something called Match Action Table. This was intended really to be the home of the protocol-specific parts. so that extensibility could be the foundational parts. We're not quite there yet because things kind of came in one package, but that's okay. So we will probably turn it into kind of a documentation separation. It's not a lot we have to do about IPv4 and IPv6 at this point. We have a discussion starting in the hybrid forwarding plane. So we talked yesterday a little bit about hybrid switches and had some questions about it. The hybrid switch and the hybrid network with both OpenFlow components and legacy components. How do you share the resources, and what do you do about shipping lanes? Do you have these ships passing in the night, or do you actually share some of them, and how do you manage that? And then finally, we have this thing called the Northbound API, which is part of the suite of SDN abstractions. I'll show you the diagram of that in a second. People wanted to talk about it. There was a little rush to try to standardize that, and we've sort of held off on that. The IETF is kind of interested in that. But this is where we want to talk about object models and service models, virtualization. How do you actually characterize the network toward those user applications that would take advantage of the network, and how do these components interact? Not that these are things we will necessarily standardize, but we want to understand them and talk about them. Whether profiles come into play here or not remains to be seen. Now, let me say more about this second bullet here. You've seen this. We took everything out of each box. We moved it up to have a network-wide OS, and we have the OpenFlow protocol, where the operating system and the network controller talks to the forwarding plane and the switches. And then we have some network OSs. Right now, there are a number of them out there, and we're learning a lot about that. And then we have this well-defined global view. I didn't say a standard API because they all have different ones right now. And so that's kind of how we are. Well, that's a very simplistic view of this world. It's actually a pretty rich environment above the OpenFlow protocol itself. So a little protocol there that does that. And we've got our arms around it. We know what it means to standardize that pretty well. But we've got the operating system. We've got some control programs embedded in it. If you look at the controllers now you can buy, they do really cool things, part of it. But other things might live above it. And we've heard a number of good examples of those yesterday. It's even more interesting than that. Put in some virtualization. And all right, well, that's sort of a different tool. How do I do that, and how do I translate the global network view to an abstract network view? And maybe there are control programs that really belong there. And then, then we have the flow visor below. This is a really useful tool. Are we going to standardize a flow visor? I don't think we're going to standardize it. But how do we understand how this works? And then, gosh, there are more apps and more tools. It's hard to say whether they're user apps or network apps or management apps or control apps. They're going to be there. How do these components play together? What can we do to help foster this ecosystem? If these things are in software, it's not clear that we're going to say, hey, here's the standard for this. But if we can talk about what are the models that would drive their development and make them work together more easily, let's talk about that. Now, right now we're focused on OpenFlow. That's our first order of business, but this is actually front and center for kind of what's next. And then we're also going to be doing more about educating the market. We've heard the last 2 days a lot of terms used by different people, not necessarily meaning the same thing. I'm sure if I asked you to write down what does network virtualization mean, I'd get some really interesting different answers. So I'm not going to do that. There will be no quizzes. But I think if we can help create some market demand, let's position this as the future in a way that makes sense to customers and brings value to them. Let's educate both our members. I don't know how many of you have had trouble in your companies getting other people in your company to understand what you're doing here. But I've heard from a few people if that's the case. I think we can help with that jointly and together, as well as to the non-members who are trying to understand what is this movement all about and why do I have so many people telling me that they're interested in it. So this is part of our vision of creating this market. And it's another part of our desire to help our members succeed. I want them to succeed in selling their products and services. So how can we do this? Just some ideas: common vocabulary, common messaging. We can develop collateral, toolkits. There are a lot of things we can do. And we can collaborate on who appears where and says what. I had a meeting with somebody yesterday here about, gee, I can't go to this and speak about ONF and the principles of software-defined networking, so I'll work with somebody who can go, somebody not part of ONF. This is just getting started. I'll be meeting with some members tomorrow at our workday to talk about it. If any of you are interested in this, talk to me. I'd love to hear from you. So my conclusions are these. There are 3 parts here. ONF is the home for OpenFlow. All the rights were transferred from Stanford to the Open Networking Foundation. And we want to take it from where it came out of Stanford to something that the commercial market can really deploy and get some business value from. So that's really where 90% of our effort is going. So we'll have a family of standards, just the right number, hopefully. We've got the foundation. We're having some building blocks. We'll offer some choices. And we're doing protocols for OpenFlow itself and configuration management, and I said compliance, interoperability, and some performance benchmarking. These are some tools you have to build around this, and I think most of these will be sort of in the management domain. And we're really striving for development by vendors and deployment by users, so we get experience, we get feedback, and we can iterate. There's a lot more to SDN than just OpenFlow, and that's the big picture that we're really excited about, because that'll make this turn into something very real and very valuable. You can't necessarily understand the value of OpenFlow by talking about a protocol. The value is in what it enables. Protocol is terrific and essential, but it's really not very interesting. It's just a protocol to convey these things. What's interesting is what you can do when it's in place, and those are these sort of upper parts of the picture of software-defined networking. And this is where we cultivate this ecosystem of new capabilities, new features, new players, and new types of businesses. I'm particularly excited by the prospect of venture investment in networking companies again. 10 years ago when I kind of went away for a while, it was really hard to get any kind of networking company funded. It was hardware-based, it was expensive, you couldn't get your multiples. If it turns into a special feature for this kind of capability with a Web 2.0-like startup based on software only, it'll be easy to see those multiples, we'll get investors, and we'll hopefully have a flowering of entrepreneurship and innovation again. And the combination of technical standards and market education will, I think, drive the ecosystem and create market pull for our members and really make it happen and make it real. I'm happy to take questions.